There are not many of us here as yet. There are a number of persons who registered for the seminar. But can I invite you to just say who you are and where you're from in terms of department? If you would just do that in 2 minutes. There are just about 8 other persons. You just open your microphone and just let us have a feel of who is, of who is in the room.
Good afternoon. This is Carlene Black from the Earthquake Unit. I don't teach, but I do a lot of outreach in terms of earthquake sensitivity. So the teaching skills are still quite useful to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carlene.
Good afternoon. My name is Bronte Liverpool Williams. I work in the Office of Administration as Senior Assistant Registrar. I taught for some time, approximately 20 years at the high school level, but in administration now, but I thought this workshop would be useful.
Thank you. Thank you, Bronte.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chisholm and colleagues. Well, I'm the stranger in the room. I am from the University of Technology Jamaica, Audrey Porter da Costa, and I operate from the Faculty of Education and Liberal Studies as senior lecturer I teach on the undergrad as also the graduate programs, and I currently direct the Master of Science degree in Workforce Training and Education. So I am never skilled enough, so I'm seizing an opportunity to sharpen the axe to do a better job at what I have been doing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Audrey.
I'm Jennifer Mason. I'm an instructor in the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures, and I'm just doing this as a refresher course.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. All right, anybody else come in? There are a few other persons who are just introducing ourselves, but we shan't take too long, so we just invite persons to open your microphones and let us know your names and your department.
I am Otele Matehari from Department of Language Linguistics and Philosophy, and I'm sitting in just to as a refresher, to increase, to see new ideas and how to incorporate it into my teaching.
Okay, Dr. Harry, long time no see. Nice to have you.
I know.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I am Arlene Allen Regis. I am at the library, main library here in Mona campus, and I have responsibility for teaching information literacy sessions. So that's why I'm here, just to get some tips on doing that better.
Okay, good. Good, Arlene. Thanks for coming. Have we all introduced ourselves? There are one or two other persons I'm seeing. I don't know if you're going to introduce yourselves, but we just have another minute for introductions. All right, well, I'm not so sure if my other colleagues are going to introduce themselves. If we invite you to introduce yourself after this in the chat, you can just tell us who you are in the chat, because we just have a 1 hour here and we don't want to go over. So we talk about unpacking the critical teaching behaviors, and I agonize over whether or not I should call it unpacking, because there are 6 teaching behaviors that are of importance this afternoon. And let me go to the other slide. Well, see the behaviors on the side: align, integrate, technology, include, engage, assess, reflect. Let me go to the other slide and point out that this comes really from the work of Lauren Barbeau and Claudia Cornijo Happel, and they've been presenting on their work, Critical Teaching Behaviors. They've written a book, Define Critical Teaching Behaviors, Defining, Documenting, and Discussing Good Teaching. And so I've been to quite a few teaching and learning conferences, particularly in the United States, perhaps in Canada too, where they've presented at quite a few conferences on these critical teaching behaviors. And so over the last 2 or so years, I've been learning about these critical teaching behaviors that they have presented on. And so I thought, having been to their workshops and look at their work, then I would say something about critical teaching behaviors this afternoon. And then perhaps persons might want us to do more, then we could do more on that. So like in any good teaching engagement or activity, we want to have some objectives to guide us as we go along. So there are 5 objectives that we have. We will discuss behaviors consistent with good teaching, especially those revealed in the critical teaching behaviors framework. We will reflect critically on the teaching behaviors. Reflect critically on the teaching behaviors you already exhibit. Determine how you might use these teaching behaviors, the CTB framework, for improvement, for documentation, and for evaluation. Decide when and how you want to implement these research-based teaching behaviors across each of the 6 CTB categories. And those CTB categories are the ones that I just mentioned. All right, so the question is, what are critical teaching behaviors? And as I say, there is a book, and these scholars out of the United States have been presenting on their work, their research over a number of years on what they call critical teaching behaviors. So the name comes out of the research that they have been doing, or they have done, where they looked at the impact of professional development activities on the faculty that they have been engaging with. To what extent is this having some impact on their teaching and the learning that emanates from teaching? So having been involved in this for a number of years, they also looked at the work of Kirkpatrick, and I'm certain most of us or several of us will be familiar with 4 levels of training evaluation. That's a very popular text. That's well known in educational circles, educational and training circles. And from this work, the 3rd tier of assessment is that which goes beyond just satisfaction. So you go to a workshop and you are satisfied with what you get in the workshop. And they explain that when one goes beyond mere satisfaction, then you might want to engage in the activities that led to that satisfaction or is over and above the satisfaction. All right, and so those would be critical behaviors that you would seek to demonstrate. And so they have been looking at this for some time, and they put it in their work that the primary group, they were instructors, and the targeted outcome they were concerned about was student learning. And so they set about identifying how certain kinds of behaviors, teaching behaviors, that when they're consistently performed, led to student learning. And of course, we can't go into all of the research that they did and how they crunched the figures and so on. But they have identified these 6 areas of practice, 6 areas of teaching, or 6 teaching behaviors that they felt were very important in in helping us to understand what good teaching is about, and they called it the Critical Teaching Behaviors Framework. And this is one of the ways in which they have advanced this conversation on good teaching. So we have 6 areas of teaching that if you're performing them well, if you're doing certain things with these 6 areas, then you are in a category that could call the Good Teachers Club. And of course, these must be observable, whether you're going to do some self-observation, and they would, they recommend, of course, how we should take stock of these behaviors, how they can be used in colleges and universities for promotion and tenure in spaces where, you have to assess people's teaching to gain promotion and so on. So they have put out a number of ways in which we can utilize this framework to enhance our understanding and reporting on teaching and learning. Teaching, of course, is notoriously difficult to measure. And everybody comes out with something, that says this is how teaching is to be measured, and we take all of these, we look at them, and we determine for ourselves what might be more important to our pedagogical practice, and looking at them also from the perspective of what university like ours might understand as important for pedagogical practice. So they talk about the Critical Teaching Behaviors Framework provides faculty, staff, and administrators with a foundation for determining shared expectations for good teaching and using common language to showcase, discuss, and evaluate teaching effectiveness. And we're going to come back to the framework, because that's what we want to focus on, the CTB, or the Critical Teaching Behaviors Framework. So there are 6 categories of behaviors that they talk about. So the good teacher or good teaching would encompass engaging in 6 of these 6 behaviors. And you notice that they put it in a diagrammatic fashion. Do you align? Do you reflect? Do you align? Do you integrate? Do you assess? Do you teach for inclusion? Do you teach and create opportunities for huge amounts of engagement? Now, as you think about your own teaching, I have a little activity, but I want to go to one other slide, unpacking the critical teaching behaviors. We're going to talk a little about alignment, and it's impossible for us to go in depth this morning with all of these critical teaching behaviors. So we can't go in depth, but they talk about curriculum alignment, and the importance of ensuring that what we are doing in our classrooms are properly aligned. So here is what we mean, or here's what they mean. I'm using their work. By aligning your teaching in a proper way in your classroom. If your teaching is going to mirror good teaching, is it properly aligned? So you start with clear learning goals. You have measurable outcomes. What kind of teaching and learning activities do you have that will ensure that these learning outcomes are realized? Are your assessment tasks related to your teaching goals, your outcomes? Do you create opportunities for feedback so that this can enhance the learning and support students as they seek to progress towards the learning goals? So that's what they mean as aligned teaching. Now, sharing in this with me is Mr. Dominic Williams. He is the administrative assistant, and he's assisted me because I have some handouts, and one of the handouts is a rubric that I want you to just review using the teaching evaluation rubric, and I said handout provided. I'm going to ask you to look at this rubric and determine for yourself whether or not you are aligning your teaching. So the rubric, so you're going to use the rubric to do a self-assessment. So I'm going to ask Dominic to, how are we going to do it, Dominic? We're going to put the rubric in the
I just sent the,
in
yeah, I
the
just sent
chat.
it in the chat.
Okay, so the rubric is in the chat. So you'll have to download the rubric, and perhaps for 5 minutes you will just review the rubric, and I will invite one or two persons to respond to the rubric to say what you think about this rubric or your own personal assessment. So we have to be willing to talk a little about this aspect of the rubric. This is more on alignment. And there are rubrics for other areas, but we can't get into all of them this morning. So you should be looking at the chat and downloading the CTB handout, the critical teaching behaviors handout, and really looking at alignment, because we can't look at more than one in this session. All right. So I think by now, many of us, if not most of us, would have looked at the rubric, and I have put up the rubric on the screen so that we can see it. So it calls us to look at our teaching in relation to alignment, since alignment has been identified as one of the big areas of the critical teaching behaviors framework. There are 6, and we named the 6 a while ago, and we're looking specifically at alignment with this rubric. So there is evidence that the rubric identify, and we were to determine where we were in relation to what the rubric call evidence. Are we at an advanced stage in terms of the pedagogy that we are involved in? Are we at a proficient stage? Are we at a developing stage? Or are we at an emerging stage in terms of this particular area or component of good teaching? And I don't know if anybody would like to comment now on your own assessment, or perhaps you'd want to comment on this this aspect of good teaching. So fundamentally, we are saying good teaching requires proper alignment, that your course objectives or your learning objectives, or whether you call them learning objectives or learning outcomes, must be properly aligned. They must be measurable, and they must be properly integrated into the instruction that you're teaching, that you're giving. You must be testing your course, or the assessment task must be properly testing the learning outcomes, the learning objectives, that it must be related to the overall course or program. We said alignment within the larger discipline. And also, to what extent is this course related to what is happening with the world, in the world? So we're looking at alignment and overall alignment in terms of your curriculum, your curricular alignment. And then we moved on to inclusive curriculum. To what extent are you inclusive in your teaching? For instance, do you use various assessment tasks and curriculum materials? And interestingly, because this is adopted from North America, they talk about representation and use of materials by scholars from minoritized groups. And I thought that I would let the word remain, but then in some of the areas I put Caribbean scholars. To what extent are we incorporating work, sometimes notoriously difficult to find work from Caribbean scholars or Caribbean writers, to include in our reading list or the materials that we're going to use in our classes? I've been there, and it's problematic in some fields. But to what extent we're seeking to do this so that our students can have a different perspective, from the dominant Anglo-European perspective and how they see life and so on. I think most of our textbooks and the articles that we read, certainly in my field, come from that area, or come from those kinds of cultures. And you do want persons to have a different understanding, or something that is more Caribbean in terms of certain I teach education, in terms of the education that we're providing in the region and so on. So I'm going to invite anybody to respond, anyone who might want to respond to the rubric in terms of your own personal assessment, or you might want to say anything about this particular rubric. So for those persons who just came in, there is a rubric that we shared in the chat that we were asking you to download and review and then respond to the rubric. But I'm not getting any response at this time. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint presentation that I was using. And we did talk about alignment or aligning our teaching. Let's see if I can get back into slideshow. Okay, so we were talking about align, and we use a rubric that asks some questions about to what extent are we a well-aligned teacher? Now, of course, this is meant for us to do in terms of self-assessment, but I was just inviting you to make yourself vulnerable and talk about your own self-assessment in a public way. And I don't think, well, I'm not seeing any takers this afternoon. What does aligned teaching look like? And some more information on what we mean when we say our teaching is well aligned. Connecting the course outcomes to the program. To what extent are our program goals? Now, I hasten to remind us that each program that you teach in has been approved by the University of the West Indies, you know, in terms of our academic quality assurance committee and our board for undergraduate studies, and they would have several program outcomes. Each course should contribute something to the achievement of the overall program outcome and institutional outcomes. So we talk about we want to develop this ideal UWI graduate. And I think on each course outline, there are 7 or so qualities that we expect to see in this ideal UWI graduate. To what extent is your course aligned to achieve some of the program goals and some of the institutional goals or the institutional outcomes? And for institutional outcomes now, we really are talking about this concept of this ideal UWI graduate and the qualities he or she should be demonstrating at graduation. And so in each lesson, we should be moving closer towards that. And as faculty members, we should certainly join forces with the department who is offering this program and join forces with the institution from which the students will graduate with this particular credential to ensure that this ideal UWI graduate and the departmental objectives or the objectives that come from the program, whether we call them program objective or program goals, are realized. And we're saying, are these clearly demarcated and seen in our lesson? So lesson planning is key, and these are important aspects of teaching: alignment, defining and communicating outcomes of learning, whether you do it in units and or in modules or in assignments. I think we put on our course outlines the kinds of objectives that we are testing in each assignment. This is a requirement now of the UWI. So some of these would be done for us, but are we carrying it forward in our actual teaching in our classrooms? So that is it for alignment. There are some other handouts that we have. Inclusive teaching. I think there's one on that, and Mr. Williams will distribute them to you in the chat, that you can just look at what we're talking about with perhaps in greater detail. Now, inclusion or inclusivity has emerged as a major component of teaching over the last few years. This is very, very important in a culture like ours, because certainly when I went to university, the students who came from, largely speaking, traditional high schools. You see, I'm old. I'm an old guy now. And so when I came to UA, most of us came from traditional high schools. In fact, I don't know if they were the new secondary schools, as they were called then, had many representatives here. Over the years, we have upgraded our new secondary schools over the last 30 years or so to become high schools. And so we have a number of new high schools. When I say new high schools, they become high schools over the last 25 years or so. And a number of the students who are in our classrooms are coming from these newer high schools and various communities, inner city, urban, rural, and so on. That was not the case in 1989 when I came to the UWI. You see, I came a long time ago. That was not the case. We did not have so many students from so many different communities and socio-economic backgrounds at the UWI. Today, it's a totally different case. So we must be very inclusive in terms of doing things to include all of those, rather than excluding. We must create opportunities for all of our learners to feel that they're a part of the learning community. We promote equity and so on. We design our learning activities that it will speak to persons from various backgrounds and various walks of life, and not just persons from, say, middle class origins. And there are different aspects of inclusion too. We could talk about gender, and we could talk about religious background. Of course, we have a number of students from different islands in the Caribbean coming here, and sometimes they complain, the ones who are not Jamaicans complain that we break into patois and they don't fully understand what we are saying. We could talk about people also who I'm trying how to put this down. Persons of different sexual orientations who are also in our classrooms, and our language and sometimes our behavior might be alienating, and so on. So we need to cultivate a psychosocial environment in the classroom that is inviting and is supportive of all learners. We should expand the space at all times for our learners to thrive, rather than collapse the space or make the space smaller, use language that is problematic and alienating. Are we these kinds of teachers? When we talk about inclusion, we're talking about things like that. Or do you create an atmosphere in the classroom where the teacher is large and in charge and is so powerful that the students cower and are fearful and are, say, I don't want to talk to that teacher because the behavior in the classroom is one that repels me rather than encourages me to attend to her. It's not just about your ability to dispense the content. And that's one of the things that we need to understand about good teaching. It is not just about our ability to be content deliverers, to deliver the content in a way that suggests that, wow, this lecturer is bright and is smart and is eloquent. That's a part of good teaching too. I think those lecturers who had us spellbound in classrooms were always considered good. And certainly I learned at the feet of lecturers who had me spellbound in the classroom. And they had a good content coverage and they were able to expound it in ways that I felt empowered by that performative engagement. So yeah, that's good, but also students oftentimes feel alienated in classroom and they won't learn, or learning will not be as at its best. Yes, Audrey, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Thank you
Inclusive.
so much. I'm enjoying the presentation so much. But I want to comment a little bit and then ask the question. I quite agree with us paying increased attention to the matter of inclusivity for all the reasons that you've articulated and more. But as you shared, I was just wondering, can we truly have an inclusive classroom where we become all things to all men at all times? Is it um an unrealistic goal to try to cater to everybody's needs at the same time? Just let's just process that
Right,
one a little more. Sometimes
right.
it's easier said than done. When you think of
Indeed.
how diverse the classroom can be, you know, let's just
Right.
talk about it a little more.
The classroom is definitely diverse. I was painting that picture of the diverse classroom, far more diverse than when I came here decades ago. You are right. You are right. The classroom is diverse and we can't be all things to all men. And nevertheless, we can't seek deliberately to offend. Um, Many persons, I don't know if I've ever heard it myself, but many persons in my time would go to classes and teachers would say, or lecturers, esteemed lecturers and professors would say, this course has a high failure rate or something of that nature. Look around, and next year or next semester, these persons won't be in this classroom and so on because they would have failed out. And students would have cowered by such statements and about high failure rates and the only way you can get an A in this classroom. And I heard this in some of my classes, that in order to get an A in this class, your work must be publishable. If it is not publishable, you can't get an A in this class, and so on. And whilst the lecturer might, in all sincerity, you would have been trying perhaps to encourage us to do well, it alienated many, many persons. So I am thinking that whilst we can't be all things to all men, we need to take stock of ourselves as best as possible as we become aware of the learning sciences. We know far more today about how students learn. So the learning sciences, as they've emerged over the last 20, 30 years, we have done a lot of work with learning sciences, cognitive sciences, and so on. So we know a lot about how students learn, and some of these things are coming from the learning sciences. To what extent are we in step with the learning sciences? Because as teachers, we want our students to learn. There is no doubt about it. I think all of us teach because we want to impact our learners, whether they are younger than us or the same age. We want everybody to learn. I don't think we're teaching because, we just want to engage in performance. And teaching is performance. There's a fair bit of performance in teaching and good performance. But we want our learners to learn. So I'm saying, whilst we can't be all things to all men, the response should be, to what extent am I in step with what the learning sciences say about learning and how best learning might be facilitated in a classroom context? And one of them is you have to be inclusive, you have to care about the students, you have to ensure the content is not over their heads, and so on. Is not, there isn't too much content in any session. A number of things that we can talk about in a session. But oftentimes what get left out of these engagements is the student themselves and how they are feeling. And whilst we can't be everything to all men, we should not deliberately engage in behaviors or activities that will alienate and likely cause problems for learning. So we have to keep stock of ourselves. And this is why one of the teaching behaviors that they are asking us to think about, and I did say we are not going to be able to do all of them today, is reflect. To what extent am I reflecting on my teaching? And oftentimes when I ask teachers to reflect on their teaching, the reflection goes to what the students did. And when I say I ask teachers, because I teach the certificate in university teaching and learning here at UWI, Mona. And I get that a lot of times, and I would have to push back on teachers and say to them, I am not asking you so much to reflect on what the students might have learned and what the students might have done. I want you to reflect on what you did and what you could have done better and how you might have helped your students or not help your students. And that becomes a little harder, and obviously, you make yourself vulnerable because the teachers are, of course, in a situation where they're talking about their own teaching, but then also they're in a classroom context where they're going to be marked. And at the end of the day, I'm going to give them a mark for their teaching practicum. And so they don't want to tell me if they made any errors. They don't want to make themselves vulnerable. They might know, but they feel that if they identify them for me, then I might be punitive in terms of my market. So these are some of the problems we have in that area. So we cannot be all things to all men. But I'm suggesting that we pay attention to the learning sciences, and whilst we have always been paying attention to content and how content is being delivered, we need to pay some attention to the psychosocial atmosphere, the psychosocial environment of the classroom, because the research is showing that is extremely important in teaching and learning. And too often, the psychosocial environment that is created in the classroom is not supportive of teaching. And oftentimes we as teachers can be culprits, our fingers as culprits. We talk in domineering ways, and we alienate by the kind of language we use, and so on. We push people away. And the research is showing that these are important. And if we are going to be good teachers, we've got to be inclusive in our learning. I'm not going to be able to do much more. We talk about include. A number of things could be said about So we say including teaching, inclusive teaching, building trust, helping them to find pathways to success and suggesting that they can be successful if they follow particular kinds of pathways. Not just successful, you will all be successful. No. How are you going to be successful? And what will be a success? What does a successful student in this course look like? What pathway would he or she have to follow? And of course, being available if you can, to help the student to follow this pathway. And one of the things, prioritizing learner engagements and feedback, but on the second bullet there on this slide, assessing personal biases. To what extent we allow our personal biases to come out in our teaching, and some of these might be real problematic and can cause issues. So, engaged. To what extent are we engaging our learners? What kind of materials do you prepare for them? Unfortunately, some years ago, we did a research activity in this university. And one of the things we found, the researcher examined a number of years assessment tasks. I think it was the examinations. And she found that a lot of the examination questions were at the lower end of the Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives, that higher order thinking was not being examined enough. And we want to engage our students meaningfully and purposefully. And if they're prepared for this in our classrooms, using higher end taxonomy, using those areas of the taxonomy that are at the higher end, the upper levels of the Bloom's taxonomy, then they should be able to respond meaningfully to questions that are asked at the upper levels of the Bloom taxonomy in exam conditions. So, engagement, to what extent are we creating active classrooms that will enable our students to learn at a very deep level and not just a very passive lecture, a very passive learning experience. We know again from the research that passivity in the classroom is not the best approach to learning. We want our students to be active. So active and interactive lectures. And in particular, when we have small classes, make use of the opportunity to engage them more. Because with small classes of 20 or 30 students, there is absolutely no need for the lecture. And there is no rule in the book that says teaching at a university must be a lecture. I think some of our faculty have that perspective that once I teach in a university, I must give a lecture. I'm not so sure where it came from. Perhaps it came from, our colonizers when they introduced the university to Caribbean soil. That this whole notion of teaching was that university was concerned with lecturing. But I think we've moved away from that, or we've been trying to move away from that for many, many years. That's why we have the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning throughout the campuses of the University of the West Indies, because we recognize that engagement or active teaching and learning ought to be part and parcel of the pedagogy that we are dispensing in these hallowed walls. All right, I'm going to stop there because it is 12:57, and we have a little more on engagement, we have a little more on assess and how we integrate technology. But I did not intend to be able to complete all of these in 1 hour, but I will share these with you by way of the slides, if you so desire. Any comment, any questions at this time? Now, also, we thank you for coming, and I think Dominic, our admin assistant, will ask you to fill in a evaluation form, so that we do need some feedback and also information as to what you might be interested in, so that will inform our programming. So thanks for coming. And please see an evaluation form. We ask you to complete it and return. How is it returned, Mr. Williams?
Once they finish it and click submit, we get it.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming. And once you need the slides, so that you can look at the other 3 areas that we did not get time to delve into. And I did not intend to delve into all 6 areas comprehensively, but I intended to at least share with you 3, and then we would send the information on the others. So thanks a million.